You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who, and today we're discussing the 8th Doctor Big Finish audio story, The Time of the Daleks. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel is Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
Now, is it the time of the remembrance of the time of the
war,
of the Daleks, the evil Dalek?
It's always the blank of the Daleks of some sort. The Eve of the Daleks was most recent, I think. Yeah, folks, be sure to write an Apple Podcast review of The Secrets of Doctor Who and share the podcast with your friends. Help us grow this community and reach more Doctor Who listeners, especially in this 60th anniversary year of Doctor Who, where I think we're going to get lots more people paying attention to Doctor Who, and they're going to be looking for a Doctor Who podcast. And recommend this one, please. And another show on the StarQuest Network you are certain to enjoy is called Prey Station Portable. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/PSP. So we are talking about this 8th Doctor Big Finish story, Time of the Daleks. And since Jimmy's not here, I'm going to give you my recap. We'll see how it goes. The 8th Doctor and Charlie are traveling in the TARDIS when they get jolted by a disturbance in the time vortex, after which the Doctor realizes Charlie doesn't know who William Shakespeare is. When he investigates, he finds that there's a time fissure that starts in the 2050s and travels back to the 16th century time of Shakespeare's life. So they travel to the 2050s, where the Euro Wars are over, and General Maria Learman is now ruling Britain under martial law. She's also a huge Shakespeare nerd, like totally quoting him everywhere like an annoying fanboy. And she's been working on a time machine, as you do, and has gotten help recently from some Daleks who recently showed up after having a little trouble of their own in the time vortex. Now, Learman's martial law rule is facing a rebellion, aided secretly by her own niece, Viola, and the scientist building her time machine, which consists of portals through mirrors. At the same time, more and more people in the world of the 2050s are forgetting the existence of Shakespeare, which the rebels have been using as a symbol of their rebellion. The Shakespeare has been their symbol. Turns out the Daleks are using Learman to effect their own plan to implement a temporal extinction device that will destroy time as we know it and put them in charge from the beginning of time. Their first attempt had failed, stranding them on Earth with Learman, and now their second attempt is attached to Learman's plan to go back and save Shakespeare. But she's not really interested in saving Shakespeare. She wants to kill him, but save all his works for her to love and appreciate for her own. She is quite mad. The Doctor and Charlie show up in the middle of all this, get involved in the usual shenanigans of being captured, being forced to help the Daleks, but really working to undermine them, and so on. At one point, Charlie travels back with Viola to the 1500s and then back to the 2050s, and in the end, it turns out that Charlie herself is the key to Learman's time travel, and the whole problem of the time fissure is due to her being the time paradox, which we've talked about since her arrival with the 8th Doctor. The Daleks don't realize this, and that ends up destroying the Daleks and Learman herself, who the Daleks have converted into a Dalek pilot to replace their own. The end. So, your overall impression of this story, Father Cory?
It's confusing, I think, is a good word. I kind of enjoyed it, what I could follow. Part of the problem is, because this is audio only, you don't have the visual cues that can sometimes clear up a lot of confusion.
Yes.
Add to that this is a time travel, multiple location, multiple things going on at different locations and different areas and different people. And I found it to be kind of a confusing mess.
Yeah.
I could follow the storyline more or less, but was the Doctor in the Hall of the Mirrors, or was he in the office that was being used as a prison cell, or was he in the kitchen with the knife, or the candlestick in the library
with Colonel Mustard?
Or was he, was he in the past? Because they go back to Shakespeare's time briefly, and oh, by the way, Shakespeare comes forward with them as a boy, and
right.
It was a story that would have done better visually, with a visual component. And that just got confusing because you had to be listening to clues that they gave as part of the dialogue. You had to be listening to the background noise. obviously the Dalek ship was easy to figure out because you'd hear the Dalek rumbling in the background and stuff like that. So I kind of enjoyed it, but I just found it to be very confusing as well.
I ended up having to find a transcript of the story online, and that helped me follow along with what was going on, which is never a good thing for an audio story when you need the written out story to follow it. And I agree. Yeah, it would be a good story in a different medium. It just was hard to follow, and especially with all these different Daleks who all sound very similar. I mean, you had a couple different actors who tried to do different voices for them, but Daleks all have that Dalek voice, and so they all sound kind of similar. And it was hard, again, like you said, hard to follow some bits of it.
This did come out in 2020 or 2002, so this is still during the hiatus years.
Yes,
only about 3 years before New Who started. So
right. And, there's lots of quotations of Shakespeare and all that sort of stuff throughout it. And it almost felt a little overbearing at times. Like I mentioned in my recap, Learman literally quotes him at every single opportunity. Like there's a quote of Shakespeare for every occasion, and I'll prove it to you. And it's like, people really wouldn't talk like that. Like that's just not.
She literally answers questions with Shakespeare quotes.
Right. And it's just like overbearing. It's kind of, I don't know. It just seems I mean, it's Doctor Who, but unrealistic seems, but it just doesn't seem like a relatable character trait. It's just kind of weird that she would be the general in charge running Britain.
Well, they do kind of poke at that too, is when she's, at the end, when she's turned into a Dalek, that's all she says is Shakespeare quotes. Literally. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
And because the Daleks promised her that they would create this special time bubble to protect the works of Shakespeare that she alone would own, and then they interface that with the Dalek shell that they put her into after they converted her, and so that's her existence. Which now this obviously predates all the other Doctor Who appearances, the New Who appearances of Shakespeare, like we get with the 10th Doctor and that sort of stuff. Which is interesting. Shakespeare does show up a number of times throughout Doctor Who.
Well, he showed up in Classic Who as well, if I remember correctly. So
yeah,
very briefly, but he does show up.
Right.
Interesting though. Speaking of predating New Who, one of the voices of the Daleks is Nicholas Briggs, who becomes the voice of the Daleks in New Who.
Right. In fact, he's the director of this program as well. And I think, in fact, he was in charge of running Big Finish and still is, maybe.
He was one of the, I think he was, if Jimmy would remember, of course, but I believe he was one of the original founders of Big Finish.
Right. Right.
He was involved in all that.
Yes.
Yeah. He's been involved with Big Finish from the beginning, and he does a lot of the alien voices and things like that.
Right. He's done Cybermen, Ice Warriors, the Jadoon, Zygons. Yeah, he's very big on voice work like that. Nicholas Briggs prominently in this one. So we have this story of Charlie, people forgetting Shakespeare, and this idea of what would the world be like if someone had erased Shakespeare from existence? What would our present day look like? And that's an interesting question. The idea of how much influence did Shakespeare have on Western civilization, not just English speaking civilization, but on Western civilization as a whole. Pretty dramatic. I mean, for one thing, we wouldn't have a lot of the words we have. He invented a lot of the English language that we have today.
Well, and he's really held up as one of the great playwrights of all time. Of course, I'm not an English language expert. I'm not, I read Shakespeare in high school and I kind of enjoyed it. I mean, some of Tempest and Romeo and Juliet, of course. And
yes.
And it was, enjoyable enough, but it's like, is he the greatest ever? And all of Western civilization revolves around him. Possibly.
Yeah. Well, I found the secret for me to enjoy Shakespeare was to watch it. So, and I think that's a mistake a lot of schools make, especially like in high school and in the lower grades, is they have kids read the plays. but it's all in Elizabethan English, and it's kind of hard to follow. But if you watch the plays, they're fun. There's a series called the Globe. They've built in England, in Stratford upon Avon. They've built a replica of the Globe Theatre that was Shakespeare's theater. And they've staged plays there and recorded them, and they're available streaming and on DVD and Blu-ray. And we got a bunch of them, and our kids, when they were little, really enjoyed them because they can be funny. Merchant of Venice and is it Merchant of Venice? Well, not Merchant. I was thinking of Merry Wives of Windsor and some others like that. They're funny, and when you see them perform, they are a lot of fun. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, there's a lot of places that have Shakespearean theaters, and every year in Oregon, the state of Oregon, the southern part of the state of Oregon, they have a Shakespeare festival. And it's a huge thing. People come from all over the world to perform in this, to view it, and one year we went down from the seminary when I was out there, and it was fantastic. I mean, and of course they do things with it. Like we saw like a Romeo and Juliet that was set in modern day where, Capulets and Montagues are like, mob families and things like that. Which is
right.
Fair enough. I mean, that's kind of a tradition with Shakespeare as well, is to take his work and to put it in different scenarios and different time periods, but not actually change the play.
Yeah, it's kind of timeless in the sense that Shakespeare, and that's one of the things with Shakespeare is his writing about the human condition is timeless, and that's what makes one of the things that makes it so great.
Yeah.
And so that's Shakespeare somewhat improbably becomes the rallying cry for this rebellion against this general for whom she's a big fanboy of. It's kind of an odd juxtaposition. I didn't quite get why Shakespeare had become this symbol for the rebellion.
It was the idea that people were losing it. Like you said in the summary, people were losing who he was. And especially, and I'm sure this is one of these places for us as Americans. Yes, we appreciate Shakespeare as a craftsman of the English language and for the amazing work that he did as a playwright, but he's not a national treasure for us, as he would be for those in the UK. Yeah,
that's true.
It'd be like if we said, "What do you mean you don't know Mark Twain?"
Right. Or
who's
and Mark Twain would be the one
issue in our country, these great playwrights of our country, of our time, and if they were suddenly forgotten that there ever was a Mark Twain,
right, or George Washington, or like these figures that everyone would know, and suddenly people are forgetting them. That would be weird.
Who was this Abraham Lincoln, and what was that Emancipation Proclamation?
Right. If people forgot that, man. So that's the milieu that's the story that the Doctor and Charlie kind of stumble into, and they end up in these 2050s, and part of the confusion is like how we kind of jump around in time a bit. We start with the Daleks when they're without explanation when the problem is all beginning. We don't get much of an explanation there. We get it more to the end. And then the problem inside the story is that it starts in the 2050s and goes back to the 1600s. And so that's when the Doctor goes to the 2050s. And initially, the Doctor's mistaken for a PR expert helping Learmon's public relations problems. And the real PR guy shows up at the gate while the Doctor's talking with the general. And he says, "Oh, it's just a prank by my colleague McCrimmins." He references, which is a whole reference to Jamie McCrimmon from the Second Doctor's time, which I thought was fun. That was a nice little callback that he came up with. And then there is a reference, by the way, in that conversation where the general says she doesn't want Britain to be dragged into this United Europe talk, and France and Germany are barely making a single economy work. Again, this is 2002, long before Brexit, but when there was these problems with actually even before the economic problems that they were having with the EU.
From the moment that Britain went into the European Union or affiliated with the European Union, they're always kind of a different situation than other parts of Europe. But There was always, kind of dissatisfaction with it that led to Brexit. But it's interesting. Yeah, this is like 2050, and it's after the Euro Wars. So then the European Union has broken up, and they had a big set of wars, and that's how this general ended up in charge of New Britain.
So maybe the UK seceded from the EU in their timeline, and they had a civil war over it. Maybe, yeah. So. I'm trying to think of like the best way to address this. Again, it's so timey-wimey. There's not a whole lot to talk about. There's a lot of running around that happens.
Well, not just running around and timey-wimey, but also so these mirrors become portals. And that's the whole principle of this time machine is supposedly the mirrors will reflect into alternate universes that move at different times.
Right.
So they sync the times, go through this portal, which they'll then take them back to their world at different times.
Right.
It's really confusing, and then they use the portals to do like inter-room and inter-building travel,
not through time but through places.
It gets really, and that's where the confusion comes in. And again, this is where more of the visual aspect would work better. To actually see them go through the portal to another place, Right. Say, the mirror's getting foggy, and now look, you can tell now there's a portal there, and
and they have to describe everything. Yeah. And the mechanics of the portals is that they were made of mirrors and clocks. Like there was a whole mirrors and clocks thing, and there was a master clock, and it wasn't working. And by the way, they used mirrors for time travel in the second Doctor story, The Evil of the Daleks, if you remember that one. That was the first Dalek time travel story. And I think it was no, it wasn't the first one where they're on Earth. That's the Dalek Master Plan. But it was, they did use mirrors in that one. So I think that's maybe what they're basing this off of, but it worked better in that, I suppose.
It was just strange. And then, of course, as the Doctor points out, you need both the physical components like the master clock and the chronoton particles, which, by the way, Charlie provides by her. But if you don't have one, you can't have the you won't have the other. It's like, the chicken and the egg, which came first, the equipment to produce the particles or the particles allowing the equipment to work.
Yes, exactly. So that it's a very part of it depends on the fact that you have to know what was going on with Charlie beforehand. So you have to have been listening to the Eighth Doctor stories up to this point. So there's an arc that they're exploring.
Yeah, and she doesn't know until the end of this story that she's the one that's causing all the time problems that they've encountered in previous stories.
Right,
because
he's been keeping it from
pulled
her.
Out of the wreck of the airship caused a time paradox that the Doctor is fighting against to keep her alive.
Right, because she was supposed to die in the wreck of the R-19, I think it is, or something like that. R-101. Yeah, R-101. Yeah, and so him saving her has created this time paradox, and so time is weird around her, and so she's the reason why this was working. In fact, at one point, the Daleks take Charlie to ensure the Doctor's compliance, and he's like, she's really more important to this than they realize.
I kind of need her.
Yeah. So, and as usual, the Doctor is forced to work for them. I mean, that's the thing that happens. The Daleks make the Doctor work for them to complete whatever their plan is, and he pretends to do so until he can sabotage and escape. Speaking of other things, like previous stories that had connections to this one, in the one we recently did called Invaders from Mars, the Eighth Doctor story, that had Orson Welles not recognizing who William Shakespeare is, which seemed weird in that one, but that's being paid off here.
Yeah, exactly. So that is one thing. Of course, we're covering very little Big Finish. We're kind of skimming through it.
Yeah.
But they do kind of tie into their own stories as well. They're willing to, especially in these they used to call it the main line, where it was Eighth Doctor stories kind of continuing on.
Right.
So on, in a regular, like the series did and does now again.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And in fact, but in that arc, I mean, you could say the Seventh Doctor kind of had an arc with what he was doing with Ace, and you could say that there were arcs in Classic Who, but this is much more of a very strong through line than I think that I've seen in Classic Who so far. I mean, apart from
we see it more in New Who, where they would always make sure they'd have the season long arc, and they'd always make sure that every episode had a little something,
right?
Even if the episode had nothing to do with the main arc. They have a little something they'd throw in there, like at the end or the beginning, to kind of connect to that main arc.
Right, like the Bad Wolf season in the Ninth Doctor. Yeah.
Or the cracks that would show up.
The cracks in time. Yeah, right. So, this whole story of Viola, who is the general's niece, who's working with the rebels, as that she's in on it, and they're trying to undermine her and overthrow her, and they launch this attack, and so there's a lot of fighting and attacks and people getting hurt, and they try to attack the nuclear reactor to shut it down so they can't power the time machine, and the Daleks are depending on it as well because it's powering this time tunnel to the time vortex where their fleet is stuck.
Yep.
And so they're trying to, so the Doctor knows that if they collapse the time tunnel, the time corridor, it will trap the Dalek fleet in the time vortex, which, destroyed, but of course they're never destroyed.
The Daleks never get destroyed.
Yes.
The Imperial Dalek that shows up all the time. And
yes, exactly. At one point, the Doctor uses aluminum foil as a makeshift mirror to portal out of a room. I thought that was a clever use of some reflective material. And the boy, we mentioned the boy. We talk a little bit more about him. So there's this boy that keeps showing up in all these scenes, and it was kind of weird. Like, what's this boy doing there? Like, what's this? This seems like a superfluous character. Well, it turns out that the boy is William Shakespeare as a boy who's been brought forward by Viola to save him. But in fact, that's one of the things that causes the problem is he's no longer in his time, and it's been causing the people to forget him.
People are forgetting him because instead of him growing up and living his life in his time, he's in modern time, or future for us, but in 2050.
Right. And do they ever send him back at the end?
The Doctor takes him back.
Yeah, that's right.
They end up in the TARDIS and the Doctor takes him back.
Presumably he doesn't remember anything.
Or maybe he does, and that's how all his stories comes from.
Yeah. Although when we get to the 10th Doctor and Martha Jones visiting with him, he doesn't remember the Doctor. They've kind of left this story out apparently. So, which is fine. It would have been too weird to try to connect it in. Learman has decided that Shakespeare must die, even though she loves and esteems him because he's become a figurehead from the rebels. And so the Daleks will ensure that only Learman will remember Shakespeare, as she thinks she's the only one who can truly understand and appreciate him. She is the ultimate toxic fan.
Oh yeah.
I was kind of looking at it and go, yeah, that's pretty much toxic fandom. Like, nobody else can appreciate this fandom, and so therefore it must be destroyed, and only I am allowed to remember it.
Kind of like the Stephen King movie Misery.
Yes, yeah, she's like the character in Misery. Right?
Same kind of deal of only I can keep you, and you will write for me, and that kind of deal.
Right. So yeah, I was thinking that. I mean, when this came out, toxic fandom wasn't yet a thing like it is today, but certainly it kind of is.
It wasn't quite to the level it is today. It definitely did exist, but definitely not to this level.
Not to the So I'm trying to think of anything else. Like the Blearman getting converted to becoming a Dalek was kind of horrific and wild. Oh.
Yeah. They described it where she literally turned from a human to the little blob with the tentacles, and the one Dalek who screwed up, he got killed. Basically, he got disconnected and killed, and then she was thrown in his place. Yeah,
that was a bit of body horror. To think about. Anything else? We end with the unresolved status of Charlie. I mean, the story ends sort of cliffhangered, where the Doctor now has to figure out what to do about what's going on with Charlie. Exactly. And we have this narrator at the beginning as we hear the Daleks going through their problem. This narrator giving quotes from Shakespeare and some other things. It will turn out that for him to be Rassilon in a upcoming Eighth Doctor story, it'll be revealed that was Rassilon, but it's not really relevant to this story.
Yeah. One thing that you see through this is people shift in their understanding of time, if you will. Basically they remember Shakespeare, they remember why they're fighting, they remember that the Daleks haven't been controlling the world, and then all of a sudden they don't remember Shakespeare, and the Daleks have always controlled the world.
Right.
And that's showing the ripples of time. And I like there's a phrase that the Doctor uses twice. He talks about possibility crystallized into probability and hardens into certainty.
That was a good line. Yeah.
And it really linked from one to the next, and that showed how this time changed. It went from just a few people understanding or, losing understanding of Shakespeare to, of course, the idea was eventually no one would remember Shakespeare and the Daleks would always rule the world. That was their plan. Right.
That's true. Yeah, that was a good explanation of how time changes. I like that, like the crystallization from probability to certainty. That was possibility to probability to certainty. That was a good one.
And then I got a kick out of the Daleks providing snacks.
Yeah. You always should worry when there are nice Daleks who seem to be cooperative and friendly, because there's something wrong there. Which
exactly.
We've seen that in live action in New Who. All right. So I think that about does it for this story. There's not much more to say from my point of view. Did you have other points you wanted to make on it?
Nope, that was it.
So we do have some feedback I'd like to get to, some listener feedback from our recent episode on the King's Demons. And the first feedback comes from Steven on Twitter, who said, I always thought it was a bad idea to show Chameleon's true form. They should have just kept it a mystery and had him shift from persona to persona. Plus, it would have been cheaper and less cheesy to show his robotic form. Nice attempt by the team, I must say. Just fell flat.
Yeah, well, I think they wanted to show him the Doctor. They wanted to show the Doctor freeing him from having to be a chameleon.
Yeah,
that he could decide for himself. It didn't work well. I mean, again, because we've talked about it multiple times where the prop just did not work.
They should have just
it's something they could do today, obviously, with CGI.
Yeah.
And a stand-in human in a green suit or whatever.
Exactly.
That's very easy to do.
Yeah.
But at the time the technology just wasn't there.
Yeah. They should have done like a Brent Spiner as Data in body paint, as the chameleon in between personas.
Exactly. Or put on some plastic suit, outfit, that armor basically that made it look like he was a robot. Yeah, there's ways they could have done that, but I think they got a little too ambitious and it just didn't work out.
Their reach exceeded their grasp, as the saying goes.
Yep.
Our next feedback is from Robert Hawkins on YouTube, who writes, my only problem is that the King's Demons isn't accurate history at all. Yes, King John was not the worst king of all time, but he was a lousy king at best. And no, he hated Magna Carta, but was in no position to do anything about it, although he tried several times throughout his reign. The Doctor's statements about King John are wildly inaccurate. Sorry, master's degree history teacher complaining here. Thank you, Robert. I'll take your word for it. I do know a little bit about the history of King John, and yeah, he was not a great king by any stretch.
Well, of course, they've got their own. The English have their own
history,
if you will. They've got their own stories about how history went. So
yes. Radical Edward on Discord, I think a character like Chameleon could work with today's technology. We could motion capture an actor and create a character with CGI like they've done with Gollum in Lord of the Rings, Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen, and Groot in Rocket Raccoon and the Guardians of the Galaxy. I think it'd be a welcome change of pace from Companion from present-day Earth number 34.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have some variety in the Doctor's in the New Who Doctor companions, that's for sure.
Yeah, and to do something that is just a little different. That is just, even wildly different. Let's bring back K9 or something like that. Something that's something that's just completely different. That was what K9 was so refreshing, was
Yeah.
It was a companion that wasn't a human being. It wasn't even a living being. It was a robot machine.
A 17th century Scotsman, a young woman from the 23rd century or whatever Zoe was. I mean, there are lots of opportunities for doing something a little different. Even another Time Lord.
Yeah, go someplace from, history of Africa during the colonies, or,
somewhere else on Earth.
Lots of things they could do,
Right. They need to do a better job of that. Mark Gillies, 1970 on YouTube writes, "To save the tomb of Christ our Lord will put the whole world to the sword." The verse of that song stuck with me all these years since I first saw this in 87. This was the song that King John sings at the banquet about the crusade. Then finally, the account is The Cloister Bell, A Journey Through Time and Space on YouTube. "Hey guys, I listened to this on Spotify and then watched the story again last night with my son. I must have watched this 100 times over the years. Davison is my favorite. Great review. I always thought that showing Chameleon's true form was a mistake. Animatronics was quite primitive at the time, so using him was a bad move on Jonathan Turner's part. Chameleon could have been an incredibly useful companion if written properly. Too bad no one knew what to do with him, like forgetting about him completely when the Tractators did their thing with the TARDIS. I didn't know that our Silver Friends creator had died, so thank you for that. Any idea where Chameleon is now? I don't know if it was ever on display anywhere in the years following Planet of Fire. Cheers from Canada."
I think they actually destroyed it for real. I mean, like when it got destroyed on screen, I think they destroyed it for real. I think they wanted to completely forget the thing ever existed.
Yeah.
I think if the prop existed today, it would show up. Either
it'd be somewhere. Yeah,
we would know it's in private collection, or it'd be in a museum somewhere. Because I mean, there's the Experience Museum in Seattle has an actual Dalek from the 7th Doctor story. Remember, for the Daleks.
Nice.
It's on display, so these props are still out there if they exist. But
I think there's a official BBC Doctor Who museum in Wales, at the BBC Wales, where they make Modern Who. But he's probably long gone. Good riddance. So that's all of our feedback. And right now, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Regina S., Cynthia B., Philip D., James C., and Kyle M. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Zyman Yannick, who edited this episode for us. So that's it from us for this time. We would love to know what you think of the Time of the Daleks. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com, or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can now watch The Secrets of Doctor Who in full video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 4th Doctor story, The Stones of Blood. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Doctor Who.
Well, thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, a brave new Britain that has such people in it.